The wheel of time turns, and ages come and go, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. The Wheel of Time turns and podcasts come and go. Welcome to WOTCast, a Wheel of Time book club. We are reading through Robert Jordan's epic fantasy series and then watching Amazon's upcoming Wheel of Time TV show. I am Caleb Wimble, and with me are my co-hosts Katie Jarvis.
Hello.
And Keeley Frank.
Hello.
Dan is stuck in a work meeting today, though he may join us later in the episode if that wraps up in time. We will see. You can find us at wotcast.net and support the show at patreon.com/wotcast. Your support means a lot. Even $2 helps. Join us on Patreon at the $5 Tarvalin tier, and you'll soon get access to special bonus episodes. Email us questions, comments, and corrections via contact@wotcast.net, or you can send us a message on our Twitter over at WOTCast Podcast. We will answer your questions, comments, and corrections here on the show. For those unfamiliar, The Wheel of Time is an epic fantasy story about the hazards of river crossings and unlicensed ferryboat operation. Last time we talked about chapters 16 to 20 of the first book in the series, The Eye of the World. We saw the party forced into a ruined city of shadows and separated by a murderous mist. This episode, we are digging into chapters 21 to 25, where we finally get out of Rand's head and find out what the deal is with the other two Rivers folks now that the fellowship is broken and the party are on their separate paths. Katie, do you mind catching us up on what happens in chapter 21, Listen to the Wind?
Yes. In chapter 21, we have Nynaeve tracking down Lan and Moraine, and she does a little eavesdropping before they notice her. And when she's eavesdropping, I think that it's she gets excited because perhaps Lan didn't know she was there, but she thinks that maybe Moraine did the whole time, but there's like a little bit of competitive play there. Moraine tells Nynaeve that she can also channel, but doesn't realize it, which is something that I kept having the misconception that had already happened, but this is when it actually happens. And Moraine tells of a sickness that comes with uncontrolled channeling as a warning. Nynaeve remembers suffering the events Moraine describes, even though she's a bit in denial about it all still. And I think it's that kind of trope where the character knows that the other character is right, but doesn't want to admit it yet and sort of denies what their ultimate truth is, in a sense.
Which is very much in line with what we've seen of Nynaeve so far. Everybody talks about Two Rivers folk as being exceptionally stubborn, and I think she's considered pretty stubborn even by other Two Rivers folks and pretty of her own mind. So what did we think of this first chapter here of getting our first one in Nynaeve's head?
It was okay. I mean, I was happy that they finally got out of Rand's head. I wrote down two notes that I forgot to bring up before, but I found it kind of weird that there's all this hype surrounding Lan being able to cover up their tracks and make sure that they're zigzagging and all the crap. And then Nynaeve just shows up and is like, "You suck at tracking. I found you guys easy." And it was like, okay, so is that supposed to be hinting at the fact? Because at that point we didn't yet really know for sure that she could access the power. So was that supposed to be she's actually that good, or he's just not as good as he thinks? I think it's probably the former, but that seems to be a running theme is people think that they're better at things than they are because then someone else shows up and it's like, haha. So I wrote that down. Also, I had a very salty note from chapter 20 that I forgot to mention. The fact that the entire freaking time getting to Shadar Logoth, they were like, oh, we have to stay together, we have to be quiet, you kids are helpless, all this crap. And then as soon as anything bad happens and the misty stuff, the fog, separates Moraine and Lan from the rest of them, they're like, well, fuck it, you're on your own. And that just that drove me absolutely nuts. I was like, you think that these kids are helpless and you have to protect them, and the evil guy is coming for them, and then as soon as confirmed the bad guys are on their way, you're like, fuck it, you guys will make it. It's like, no, that's not how that works, and I felt that was kind of a cop-out. But most important note for chapter 21 is I'm doing a horse count because I am not a fan of any kind of harm coming to animals at all. So I wrote down as I was reading through the chapters, so confirmed that 4 of the horses are still alive, if anyone is concerned about that.
And we don't know the fate of the other, how many are there? 6? Total?
I think there's
the other 2.
Yeah, about 6, and right now they have not said where they are, but I have a horse count list.
I know, you're not the first person I've heard express a very, very strong aversion to, like, especially to horse harm in books, and it was actually something Katie will remember thinking about pretty heavily, debating portions of the YA fantasy novel I was working on last year with the fate of the main character's horse in that one throughout and the things they go through. I think you're correct about Nynaeve. As far as I can tell, I'm like 90% positive she finds them with the power, and that goes into what Moraine is talking about with the thing where wisdoms talk about listening to the wind and stuff like that, where they're actually doing something with flows of spirit and air with the one power. So I think for sure those were meant to be hints about what she's capable of, which goes beyond even Lan's ability to leave behind. And as far as the separation and Moraine's sudden, like, well, fuck it, nothing we can do for them now. I wonder, does this fit in with her general, like, her way of, we talked about her go with the flowitness, or whatever we would call that, and just immediate acceptance of things as part of the pattern. But we've also seen her willing to engage in really harsh triage decisions really quickly, to where she's just decided, nope, well, we can't save those people, or this is the more important thing now. And I don't know, I think I get the feeling in this chapter that she lays out her case. She's like, look, we can't go after all of them at once. I'm only one person. I'm only one Aes Sedai. I only have my one warder, and we can't separate. So I'm going to pick the highest priority pair or set of these kids to go after and make those the ones, because I think they are the ones most likely to get found by the Dark One right now. I don't know. I think that was my interpretation of, although that could still be pretty annoying in the way that she describes it and is kind of dismissive of Nynaeve's, like, sputtering indignity about, like, leaving the others to their own fates off in the wide world where they've never been.
Well, and I do wonder, because I think it's this chapter where they explain what the coins were that she gave them in chapter 1. So I think with the coins, she can tell if they're alive, or at least if they still have the coin. So maybe that was also part of it, that she's like, I'll be able to tell if they're dead or whatever. But also, that's not enough. I feel like that's not enough.
She can also sense people she's healed, right?
Yeah.
And track people she's healed, which who is unaccounted for between the 2 of those. So the 3 teenage boys all have a coin each, and has she not healed Nynaeve or Egwene before, or has she?
I feel like she didn't.
I think Nynaeve healed Egwene before, right? So they have the connection.
I think so.
Oh.
Yeah, but
right.
More.
Okay. And then as far as the coins go, I'm already forgetting. I have the sense, or maybe it felt like they were going to in the scene in chapter 20 or whenever it was when they aboard the Spray Bail Doman's ship. Did Rand and Matt give up their coins as part of the cost of passage there? I mean, they're still on the ship with him, so presumably the coins are still around, but they're not touching them or on their persons anymore. I don't know. Am I making up? That seems like the inevitable thing that would happen there, plot-wise, right? Like, if you're structuring the story.
They did give them up because Tom was annoyed, and he was like, you didn't have to do that. I could have just told them a story or something. But
Right. Bought their passage, Gleeman style. So we also find out here Nynaeve knew and has always known Egwene is special, even though Nynaeve's still in desire about the whole one power thing. I think she seems maybe a little faster to accept it about Egwene, though she denies that at first that they really need the White Tower's help for this. She's like, well, if I can learn to do it and control it on my own, then she could too. I don't see why not. And we find out that this is almost invariably fatal, right? Like, it's extremely rare for somebody to be able to channel the one power on their own in the first place, and to do it in any controlled way. And even if they do, they will die of these fevers, maybe, and fits. I think you could manage to cruise control over the power, even if touching the true source still comes at random. If you had not, it would have killed you eventually, and it will kill Egwene if you manage to stop her from going to Tar Valon. Of 4 who have the inborn ability that you and Egwene have, 3 die in a year if we do not find and train them, I think is the implication there. So that's not good for Egwene's chances right now if she doesn't get to the White Tower pretty soon.
I mean, one plausible explanation for why Moraine just happened to be in Two Rivers would be that she was like searching out those with the one power so she could guide them towards their training. I don't know if that will be a part of the story, but that would be a plausible reason.
And she points out that not only does Nynaeve has great potential, she says that she thinks with training, Nynaeve might become more powerful than even Egwene, and I believe she can become one of the most powerful Aes Sedai we have seen in centuries. So you almost wonder if there's something like a bonfire glow coming out of the Two Rivers at this point, if Aes Sedai can sense one another and sense the channeling or the touching of the one power, that something is going on with this isolated village of sheep farmers and the like out here. Nynaeve is even stubborn about asking Moraine for help. She would rather Trollocs had appeared than she had been forced to say please to this woman, we're told. Once again, Moraine says that she gives her, like Nynaeve is asking, why are you doing this? What is it that you want with Rand, Mat, and Perrin? Okay, I get what you want with Egwene so badly. That makes sense. And Moraine replies again, the Dark One wants them. If the Dark One wants a thing, I oppose it. Can there be a simpler reason or a better? And, we know she doesn't lie, or we're told by Tom that Aes Sedai don't lie. And I'm thinking to this answer, maybe not, but there sure could be a more complete reason, right, than the one that Moraine is giving right now for why she is interested in Rand and Mat and Perrin. Oh, Moraine does say, the two who went down river may need me more. They have lost their coins, and Murdral are either pursuing them or else trying to intercept us at Whitebridge. She sighed. I must take care of the greatest need first. Okay, so that's partly why she's rushing, because they've been separated from their coins, and she knows the Murdral's after them. Nynaeve is having this real internal struggle because Light of Wisdom is supposed to look after all her people. Why do I have to choose like this? None of these Two Rivers characters like being put on the horns of a dilemma every time it's come up so far. And finally, as the chapter ends, Nynaeve swears to herself that if they did not find Egwene and the boys, all of them alive and unharmed, not all of Moraine's power would protect her. Not all her power. I can use it, woman. You told me so yourself. I can use it against you. So we're already getting fantasies of possible anti-Moraine revenge here from Nynaeve. So, Keeley, what happens in chapter 22, A Path Chosen?
Yeah, so I have no notes for this one. This one was really short for me, but it's a Perrin chapter, and so Perrin finds Egwene and Bella, the horse, on the riverbank. They kind of argue over all of the bad options that they have for what to do next, but eventually decide to just cut through the wilderness and head straight for Caemlyn, which is the capital city.
Yep. Yeah, we sure do get Perrin being baffled with Egwene a lot throughout this chapter and his last chapter with her and the coming Perrin chapter with Egwene, and expressing frustration at her seeming mercurialness and her going back and forth on whether she wants to decide things for them or lead or not.
I started to get pretty annoyed in the following chapter. I guess I okay, Perrin's being Perrin here, but then by the next chapter, I was like, all we're hearing about is how bossy Egwene is and how he wants to be in control, but how can he deal with the fact that she also likes to be in control? And I feel like that, anyway, it goes into the next chapter, but, there's even a comment by another character about, it seems like she's a pushy one or something. And I was just like, oh, I'm so irritated right now.
Yep. And I guess we'll get even more into that in his next chapter, because like you said, it gets more intense. He also sure does love his folksy sayings, Perrin. I started marking out the number. I guess that's sort of his role, his defining characteristics so far before we've been in his head, but I'm noticing it even more now. The first one here in this chapter was hoping that things will turn out, they'll find the others or whatever. But hope is like a piece of string when you're drowning, he says to Egwene. It just isn't enough to get you out by yourself. And then it's just almost every other page, I think, of these chapters, he has some folksy saying or another. A lot of them from Master Alver, who is, that's Egwene's dad, right? Who is the mayor, and others from Master Luhan, who I think he is apprenticed to as a blacksmith. And they decide that is it Moraine they're talking about here? Yeah, if Moraine doesn't find us in Caemlyn in a few days, we go on to Tarvalon and put our case before the Amerlin seat. Perrin took a deep breath. 2 weeks ago, you'd never seen an Aes Sedai. Now you're talking about the Amerlin seat. Light. And they decide to set off. And I don't know that I have anything else to say about this brief chapter, and doesn't look like any of us do, which takes us into the next one, still with Perrin in chapter 23, Wolf Brother. Here, Perrin finds out, and Egwene kind of admits sheepishly that she's been starting campfires with the power. So she is making use of it. She is practicing the things that Moraine started to show her. She's not able to do it consistently. She's sort of struggling when he comes in on her. He was wondering how she did it so effortlessly before, and she's not able to find, to get her mind to the place it needs to be this time. They're unable to find game along their path. They struggle to survive off foraged roots for days and days and days. Things are not looking grim. Like, we don't get the sense that they're going to starve to death, but it's becoming an increasingly uncomfortable, and we soon learn, lost adventure, because they stumble upon the campfire of Elias Makera, a yellow-eyed man who claims that he and Perrin can talk to wolves. And he's this real... We've talked about the ways in which Lan is very Aragorn, and I think that's true. Lan has extreme Aragorn vibes. Elias has extreme Strider vibes. He is this like dirty, out in the country, scraggly beard, a kind of sharp-eyed, haunting, slightly bestial, hangs with animals guy, and talks to wolves guys, which are all like aspects of Strider as we're introduced to him in Fellowship of the Rings, more so in the book than the movie, I think. And Elias lets them know that they're way off course. They're like, the chart they're going, he says they're going to pass like so many miles north of Caemlyn. They might even never hit civilization before they make it to the spine of the world and like accidentally wander over into Aiel or Trolloc territory. And he offers to escort them south to Andor, where they're going, where Caemlyn is the capital. And I forget if they've even like wandered clear out of the country at this point. Because although I don't think it has actually been said explicitly, because the Two Rivers folk do not spend a lot of time thinking about politics or political borders, but I believe the Two Rivers is in Andor. Like it's part of, like Andor feels like kind of our England or Britain analog here, Caemlyn being the capital, being kind of the London analog, and they are trudging, admittedly, in the opposite direction. If you were coming from like the boonies in the north in Britain, you'd be heading south to London, whereas they were going northeast before, and now they got to head south again, because I guess that they overshot it. What did we think about this chapter, Wolf Brother, and about the Wolf Brother we meet?
I feel like I thought Elias was an interesting character. So I was happy for him to be introduced with his yellow eyes. And I think it's an interesting aspect of Perrin that we find that he can sense and communicate with the wolves, although he seems to be in like the similar type of denial that Nynaeve is in about, he doesn't want to believe that he can. It's kind of interesting because in this world where there are lots of different otherworldly aspects going on and different powers, and there's these fierce creatures chasing them, you'd think that having any kind of special power at all would be desirable and make you feel stronger and more in control and more powerful. So the denial is interesting in the situation that they're all in, because they're being hunted. So if I was being hunted and someone was like, you have this power, I'd be like, fabulous, let me hone in on that. I can use it.
Chat with wolves, awesome. What can they tell me?
Yeah, and I was getting really annoyed with Perrin. The fact that he kept pointing out that basically, like, Egwene wanting to do anything. I think at one point, like, he literally says, like, well, in all the hero stories, there's no woman having an opinion the whole time. And that's like, all right, fuck you, Perrin. Like, so I'm getting annoyed with his character and that aspect of that. It just feels like Robert Jordan doesn't want to write a woman that doesn't have some like massive flaw that makes her annoying to all the men. But on the other hand, I feel like he's also doing a disservice to all the male character, because they then come across as like very simple-minded. Like, well, why do you think so much? Why do you have opinions? Because like clearly, I don't think this much, and I don't have opinions, and I just go blow. And so trying to see both sides of it and not just hating on the dude. But also, I wrote that the whole scene where they're talking about them like not being able to find food felt like that lasted a really long time. It was 2 days, which not having.
That was it?
Yeah, like not having food on you. I'm sure once you hit day 2, you're going probably a little crazy. But it definitely just read to me like they were together for such a long time, and it was 2 days before they hit the area where they find Elias. So I was like, okay, well, they definitely set the stage for these kids being hella dramatic. And so is this parent thing, like, so we know that Rand can kind of like hone in on this other kind of personality trait, or like this other being inside of him where like he was an asshole to the White Cloaks, and like he can
It kind of
sense
takes him over,
Yeah.
it seems. And yeah.
And then was it Matt that was like screaming language, like the old god language? So like there's something with him. So like the wolf thing, I guess, is parents.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first we've gotten. And I mean, he was shouting battle cries before. I don't think he spoke in the old tongue. I don't think he understood it the way Egwene did when Matt was speaking, which was weird because she also doesn't speak the old tongue. But yeah, I think this is his thing so far, like where everybody getting these revelations about themselves that they all seem to have, whether it's the one power or one of these other powers that are not of the one power, which I guess is not the number one. Maybe that's what it is, the number one power, the one power. And then all these various other magics that exist out in the world, or that aren't really presented as magic necessarily, because nobody seems to really understand what these phenomena are, what's happening to the Two Rivers kids. And I keep saying kids, but I looked it up after, and I think I was saying last time I thought they were all 17 or 18, but Egwene is 17 from what I looked up. There's websites that have done the math based on the years, because the books never actually tell you what their actual ages are. They just tell you what year they were born at some point. But Egwene is 17 and Perrin is 19, as are Rand and Matt. And they do feel awful. Like, I wonder how much of the, like, it's hard to parse it from the gender frustrations. I try to figure out here to what extent Jordan is trying to write them as annoying teenagers who have a lot of room for growth and who have a lot of really limited perspective and raging hormones and like just constant attitude issues and just really don't know how to get along with each other in a productive way. They kind of get there eventually, I guess, but Perrin's going to grumble about it in his head about Egwene nonstop. And I don't know how successful it is, because I feel like it's often, it's really hard to write people who aren't in your age group in general. It's easy to forget what people younger than you are, what it was like to be that age. And it's hard to imagine sometimes what it's like to be older. So I don't know how well he does that, if that's what Jordan's doing here. And if all three of the boys are coming across as just a little too immature and petulant for their age, maybe for 19, especially given, you pointed out before, Keeley, they've had to take on like some adult responsibilities in the village, and they've not lived like an easy life, but they're not like off at college partying or anything. Katie, it looked like you maybe had some thoughts.
I mean, it's interesting that I do feel like they read more like 14 or 15 to me, but you said it is a really difficult thing to do. I know in the book that I'm writing, in each draft, like the voice of the main character who started out as 9 and is now 13, just it changes drastically. And it's a difficult thing to do. And I was sort of, before, when I was finishing up the last chapter, I was thinking of something you said in the last episode, Caleb, that like in order for this series to continue through all these books and these characters to continue to develop, obviously they're going to become more full and they're going to hopefully less annoying and more worldly and in their perspectives. And so like I'm holding on to that a little bit. And I guess if we're starting off at their kind of most immature state and perhaps the writers' least familiarity with these characters, and then we'll be growing from there. So I look forward to that.
It is a lot to ask for a reader, right, to get through. We're at 45% of this book, maybe, in these chapters this week. And if we're all still being annoyed as hell with the perspective characters that we're in at this time, that's maybe dragging its feet a little about doing that. So even without having seen any of the show yet beyond teasers and trailers, I think I am getting a very good understanding, revisiting Eye of the World, why they seem to be choosing to focus on Moraine so centrally as the perspective character and as the one that an audience, and maybe especially now an adult audience for this show, since most of us who read this book when we were kids are not kids anymore and maybe have less patience for this either this bullshit or this portrayal of what maybe Jordan sees as childish bullshit. So maybe I don't know, that seems like a pretty good reason to me to at least anchor us in Moraine, even if it is going to be giving a lot of things away early on about the larger story, beyond the fact that, you could look at it from a production point of view and say, oh, well, she's the most marketable star, Rosamund Pike, by far. Probably to sell her on the story, we had to sell her as the main character in the way that like Sean Bean was for season 1 of Game of Thrones. Of course, we all know how that went long term with a bit of audience switcheroo there. So we do learn some things from Elias in this chapter. He talks maybe more about the spine of the world and the Aiel and the Aiel waste more than we've heard so far, and they'll come up in the next couple of chapters as well here, and more it feels like we're getting these hints of the wider world. And it's interesting, we've been talking a lot about Dune recently, that feels like the whole world's been talking a lot about Dune recently. The difference in approach, without hopefully taking us down a tangent there, where between the Dune movies and the Dune books, I feel like that all the Dune movies we've gotten open in their first scenes with the Atreides and with Paul in a very eye of the world kind of way, where we're very slowly brought into things and we got to get lots of exposition from all the other characters about what's going on in the world. Who are these factions? What are these? What is a Bene Gesserit? Like what is going on in the wider area? But I went back and reread the first chapter of Dune, and it just throws you right in there. Nothing like that, and nothing like the eye of the world. Maybe like the prologue here actually, but it just like throws you into the Gom Jabbar. You have no idea what's going on if you don't know who any of these people are or what these terms mean, and you just know that basically like a teenager or very young adult is being put through this like hellish trial by this strange older woman who belongs to the secret religious order that seems to have something to do with his mother. And it's just like, and I can see advantages to both approaches, to the easing in that this novel has been doing versus the like throwing you in the fire. But I feel like if Dan were here, he would certainly be voicing the concern he's brought up that it's still taking us a long time to really get these characters plugged into the world. Like our main Two Rivers teens are still so in their own small mental world and the mindset that they grew up with, even though they're meeting all these new people and finding out about these strange things that they never knew before.
I won't say anything about the movie, but I do feel like the book Dune is, I feel it's an incredibly admirably crafted book. Like I read it and I'm like, oh God, I wish I wrote that. And I think what you said is one of the reasons why, because we are pulled so quickly into some kind of essence of the characters as well as the story and the world, without having these kind of slow pace explanations. And it's a complex thing to do. And not to say that, like, I actually like some of Jordan's writing a lot. I think he's really good at descriptions of especially of like the darker characters, and he's certainly incredibly imaginative. But I think when you compare it to something like Dune, it's like this slow, stretched out thing compared to just like jumping in.
Yeah. I wonder if that also has anything to do with the structure of, I think Dune was one of those last big novels that was published as a serial and in small short story chunks in a magazine at a time for like the year before I think it was actually published, like put together and published as a novel. And you really like you can't keep readers' attention, right? If you're taking an entire year of issues of this magazine where we still really haven't gotten to the full meat of the journey, you've got to like get their attention right away. And I think that's maybe something that did not stay true as much for Herbert's later novels, that I feel like, especially Dune Messiah, like things slow down so quickly from the pace that we reached at the end of Dune. But we'll see. I guess we'll see how Jordan handles that. I tend to think, my memory is that he really reaches a pretty cool place by the end of this novel, and that he's in peak form for the rest of this original trilogy. We'll see if that holds true, because I do remember things do slow down a lot in book 4. That's far in the future. We're here with Elias now learning about how much wolves hate Trollocs. They hate Trollocs and half-men worse than wildfire, worse than anything. Talks about how they hunted with humankind in the time before time, at the beginning of the world maybe, or in a prior age. We learn more about the Red Aja. This is at least the third time we have heard about the possible sense that there are different orders or factions within the Aes Sedai, even though I don't think we even know what Aja Moraine is of at this point. I don't think she's mentioned, or anybody's even thought to ask her when they've learned that there are these like Red Aja who, this is Elias putting, the Red Aja, those that like hunting men who mess with the One Power. They wanted to gentle me once. I told them to their faces they were Black Aja and served the Dark One, I said, and they didn't like that at all. They tried to catch him. He wound up killing a couple of warders. Bad business, he says, killing warders. He didn't like it, but he did what he had to do to escape these Aes Sedai who thought he could maybe use the power or wanted to experiment on him or whatever it was that they wanted. And he talks about this wolf-speaking power, whatever it is, as being old as humankind, old as wolves. And Aes Sedai don't like that. They don't like old things coming again and ancient barriers weakening. And they're afraid that the Dark One will get loose as a part of all this. We learn about Elias's pack, which maybe we'll get more detail on these wolves as they weave into the chapters, and about their own leadership structure. It seems like Dapple's the head of the family. And then we have Perrin like feeling all the other wolves nearby and realizing that he can can sense them and kind of sense emotions from them, at least, and hatred and the taste of blood. Katie, do you want to let us know what happens in the next chapter, 24, Flight Down the Arenal?
In chapter 24, Rand has another one of his Baalzamon dreams that it seems are coming pretty frequently, like maybe every night. I'm not sure. Tom pretends that Matt and Rand are his apprentices. He teaches them juggling and the flute, respectively, trying to make everyone really believe this story that he has spun. They entertain the crew, and then they spot this metal tower with no doors or windows as they're trolling by. And Rand climbs the mast and is hit with a wave of giddiness, nearly falling off before Tom snaps him out of it. That one was a bit strange to me. I wasn't sure if he was being kind of possessed. I guess that was the implication there. But with Matt, it was a much more obvious. Yeah. He certainly was kind of overcome with this desire for treasure again, which seems to be something that happens to him. And then we find out that he did take something from Shadar Logoth, which was, what Moraine warned them not to do. But he thinks somehow it wasn't because he didn't take it directly from our guy with the M name.
Mordeth?
Yes. Mordeth, how could I forget? So he feels like it's fine, but we can obviously see that Matt is not fine. And this reflects back to chapter 19, which that chapter annoyed me, but I guess I can see here that it's building something as far as Matt's character and the possession that is overcoming him. So I think that's an interesting aspect that's going on here with Matt right now.
Yeah, and I wrote down Matt and his friggin' need for treasure, and then Matt definitely fucked up by taking that knife. And he says, like you just said, Katie, he specifically says, well, Mordeth didn't give it to me, I took it. And
right, it wasn't a gift.
Right, and that's what Moraine said. She was like, okay, as long as he didn't give you. But, we know that she doesn't fully tell the truth. She doesn't lie. She just, omits things. So, this is very, for me, whitest kids Abe Lincoln, now you fucked up. This is setting up the stage for him to fuck up.
And that probably wasn't even something she meant to omit, right? She probably thought the implication was clear, don't take treasure from Shadar Logoth.
And I even got the sense that, I think maybe it says, do you remember that Matt, won't talk about the dreams he's having anymore? I feel from the dream that is set up at the beginning of this, where Rand is still trying to evade Baalzamon, it feels like maybe in Matt's dream, he is in cahoots with him or something. I don't know. Maybe he's not able to resist anymore, or, some of that. I don't know. I guess that I'm just projecting and making that up. But it seems like Rand in the dreams is still really putting up the resistance, and maybe Matt isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he seems a bit, not nonchalant, that's not the word I want for it, but almost like the dream is not remotely his biggest concern right now, and doesn't think it's nearly as important as his current treasure-seeking obsession. Speaking of the dream, I liked the first couple of Baalzamon dream sequences a lot in the earlier chapters. This one is still very vividly described, and it's a very cool world that's put here. There was a distinct point about halfway through, though, I think the paragraph where there had been 2 or 3 close brushes, Rand is describing, though we cannot remember them clearly, but for a long, long time, how long he had run while Baalzamon vainly pursued. And I was starting to lose interest in this scene, where it's already a hard sell, I think, for a dream sequence to feel invested in. These dream sequences, at least we know that there's something important or real about them. They're not just dreams. They have a concrete element. Rand wakes up with his finger pricked and bleeding, it gets pricked in the dream. And I did start to, near the end of it, in the thorn maze, I started to get interested again, just because it was, more fun scenery. And of course, Baalzamon shows up again in his blood-red cloak, flame searing in his eyes, and doing his usual threats and talking about the eye of the world, not going to serve Rand, and you are my hound, and I will not, if you will not course at my command, I will strangle you with the corpse of the great serpent. Whether that's literal or figurative, I guess we'll find out. And it got my attention again, but I do feel I don't know if I can take another pages and pages long dream sequence building up to exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
To, both of them yelling things at each other, Rand not understanding any of it, it and then pricking on something and waking up, I guess. This was nothing to do with the dream, but right after it, I highlighted this line because I'm like, is this like a little literary joke? The spray made haste slowly down the RNL, and and I'm wondering, wait, did it make haste or was it slow? Because those seem like exactly the opposite thing to me. And I'm like trying to dictionary, is there like a euphemistic sense of making haste, which means just to be going somewhere? And I didn't find it.
That kind of to me feels like when his wife Harriet was editing, she was like, you should use a different word. And so he just like picked out a thesaurus to find another word.
Or maybe she said, you should change this phrase. And he was like, why are you so bossy? And then he didn't change the phrase.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. I guess we'll find out maybe in our potential future Harriet episode, like to what extent that does characterize their relationship or not. I hope not, but we'll see. We get some light background drama with the crew and possibly their distrust. It doesn't seem like it's really anything big to worry about yet. It's like it doesn't feel like it's to the foreground. We pass another very familiar either late Fellowship or early Two Towers scene of giant kings and queens stone statues alongside the river. Their feet like so ancient that their features are weathered and smooth. I'm like, yep, that's the Argonath, all right. That's the pillars of kings, signaling that the Fellowship is broken and we're going down the river to the next chapter of our adventure. So we're sure hitting those beats. We get to that tower of metal. We learn a little bit about the sea folk who are sailing and searching for the Koramor, their chosen one. So yet another group of people that were introduced here too with their own agenda. We get the possible possession scene with Rand, Matt's weirdness about his dagger. Any last thoughts on 24?
So the end of Rand's dream, I thought was probably the best part. Well, like when he wakes up, but also when he looks in like a mirror and his face kind of like merges with the Dark One's face. And I was like, oh, symbolism, I like it. Like I thought it was creepy and really cool. Question, do we know if Egwene is having dreams like this?
I'm not sure. I remember her being cagey and hesitant about when dreams came up as a conversation once, but I also remember Tom convincing the three boys to keep their dreams a secret because he didn't think it was a good idea for Moraine to find out. Katie, it looked like you might have remembered something about that.
I'm not sure if Egwene is having the dreams, but I thought it was the last chapter, but perhaps it's the next one where we find out that since Perrin has been around the wolves, he has not been having the dreams. So I thought, isn't that correct? Is that correct? I think that's what he says, which I think is interesting. So it's like the wolves are having a positive effect on him in some way, or like they are deterring the evil. I don't know. So I thought,
because they're really antagonistic with the Dark One and his servants, it seems.
Yeah. So they're like holding him off or something. So I thought that was interesting, but I think that's in chapter 25.
Yeah, the mirrors were pretty cool and boy, I'm having trouble remembering now because it was such a dreamy, hard to follow sequence visually where I think Red escapes into the mirrors. Somehow he does something that instinctively, and I think this is all in his head in the dream, but I think he knows that it's something really, really dangerous that he's doing, but less dangerous than getting caught by Baalzamon. So he does something where he slips into the mirrors and he's watching Baalzamon and like 100 of them, like the reflections moving around, and I think uses that to escape him. I almost feel like I ought to have read that sequence again because I don't have a clear picture of it in my mind, but I didn't get a chance to go back to it. So maybe I will before next episode. But yeah, Katie, you were talking about getting back to the wolves in chapter 25, the traveling people. This is where we do return to Perrin's point of view. Elias and his wolves lead Perrin and Egwene to a camp of the extremely pacifist Tuatha'an, whom the Emmons Fielders know as Tinkers, and who are, I think, to me, seems like a blindingly obvious analog for European Roma and the traveling folk in Ireland. Maybe see if we got some combination of features between the two, but they are filling that niche, including in the prejudices that the Two Rivers people have about them. Perrin learns about the so-called Way of the Leaf from their leader Ryan. I forgot to look up pronunciation on that one. I think it's like maybe Ryan. Egwene dances with Ryan's grandson, Aram, or Aram. Thoughts on chapter 25?
I liked the Way of the Leaf. I like the description. The leaf lives its appointed time and does not struggle against the wind that carries it away. The leaf does no harm and finally falls to nourish new leaves. So it should be with all men and women. I was into that perspective, which obviously is kind of starkly opposed to what's going on in the rest of the book, and maybe not a plausible approach in dealing with dark friends, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, it's I like the way Jordan presents them a lot, and I think we get, even though Perrin is very skeptical of it here and immediately like, well, what about, violence in defense of your family? Like clearly you need to use physical force sometimes and things like that. And I think Jordan does a pretty good job, even in Perrin's perspective, of presenting their culture and case pretty eloquently. Like you said, the wording of the Way of the Leaf and why they have this philosophy, which we learned Elias is very opposed to, and that there's like this soft dynamic where he knows these folk. He knows Ryan. They know each other. They've had previous encounters. And Ryan, Elias feels like Ryan is kind of preaching at him and trying to get him to adopt this philosophy, because Elias is very violent and he like sort of lives on the run because people want to hunt him down. People have tried to capture him or kill him before, and he's had to kill in what he sees as self-defense. And he sees himself as like this hunter in the forest and free in that way. And so his wolf philosophy doesn't really gel with this way of nonviolence. I do wonder, right from the beginning here, I remember having this feeling the first time I read the book, you hinted at this, Katie, whether the novel kind of stacks the deck against the Tinkers, against the Tuatha'an, by setting this in a world where we know that there is an ultimate destructive, all-consumptive evil that so far it sure seems like you've got to use some killing force to deal with sometimes, less like a gross, faceless, like mouthy, windy, shadow-hopping, snake-like man like cuts you down with his poisoned blade. I don't know. It feels like there's something a little unfair in the presumption here and the setup, because of course we have like real societies and real faiths and real religions, and being my family originally being from Pennsylvania, where my parents grew up and where my grandparents are from. Think a lot about the Quakers, about the Society of Friends, and their philosophy of nonviolence in general, and that they're like sort of deeply in the history of Pennsylvania and the colonization of it, but are still like, obviously still around today. And obviously that is a philosophy that people have found themselves able to live by. And there's much more to it than that, for somebody like the Friends. But yeah, I don't know. That's my rambling sort of like thinking about the ways in which the Tuatha'an are presented here, what role they might play in this narrative, whether there's something about parents' perspective that's going to be forced on them because of the way this world is. I don't know. We also learn about we get an anecdote about the Aiel, a story of an Aiel woman, a spear maiden. Did anybody make anything of that sequence at all? Where we're kind of hearing the story of a message she is passing off to the Tuatha'an?
So I wrote it down.
Okay, great.
I thought like Maidens of the Spear was a really awesome group name for the female Aiel who are fighters. I felt like this was kind of the first introduction that we have of where women are not like necessarily looked down upon. Maybe I just like latched onto it because I thought that was cool as hell. But because I feel like any other time they've talked about women so far, it's been in kind of like a really negative way of like, even the women that kind of lead the like neighborhoods or villages or whatever, like someone's complaining about them. But this was like, oh, these are like really strong fighters, like they're out in the desert. So I thought that was kind of cool. I wrote, they said, was it leaf blighter and sight burner? And then a quote about burning the eye of the world. And so it's like, okay, this shit must be significant in some way, but I don't know what it is yet, so I'm just going to note it, and hopefully it'll make sense later. Yeah,
this Aiel in her dying message said that the Dark One, also means to slay the great serpent, and she says, warn the people, lost one, which weighs heavily on Ryan, because he says, she called us the lost, the Tuatha'an. I never knew before how much they loathe us, because we did learn the Tinkers can travel. They're one of the few people who can travel freely into the Aiel Waste, and nobody bothers them really wherever they go, because people rely on them for their services and for their skill with tinkering, but also because they're so nonviolent that people don't really worry about them, other than places like the Two Rivers, I guess, where people have these beliefs that the Tuatha'an are going to steal their stuff or steal their children away, which are real world things that you will still hear today in Europe in prejudices against the Roma. You hear that language is really common in a lot of countries. I mean, I've only visited one or two, but have talked to people from others where, it's apparently still very much a thing today, of where people believe, the traveling folk come to town, or distrust of these people who don't live in any one place, and they're definitely going to steal your kids away and all these these other sort of things where, from their explanation, I think it's either Ryan or the other woman's name, the Tuatha'an woman who's a little bit younger than him. I can't recall if it's his wife or not, who talks about, or Ela, I guess is her name, talking about, I mean, sometimes people come off and join us, and they want to like become a part of our lives. We don't steal children. Or maybe it's Elias who points that out too. It's like, city folk get upset when their youth start wandering off into this peaceful life on the road, with these very colorful, literally colorful, wearing all these like ultra bright colors, primary colored clothing and everything.
That is interesting. It almost has a cult-like feel to it. Like they're brightly colored cult-like pacifists. And there's just this negative connotation that they kind of wrap you up in there. I think even, what's the character's name that's telling us about his pacifist ways?
Ryan, I think it's Ryan, but I have no clue what the pronunciation
he even
is.
gets scolded a little bit for like trying to like convert the newcomers, which I thought was
Yeah, they definitely, I thought that this was an interesting concept to like bring this group in that is just so opposite everything that's happening right now, but it did feel very culty, that it was like as soon as they get near him, they were like, just shut up, like we don't want to hear what you have to say, you've told us 1,000 times, I'm gonna slam the door shut on you. But I also thought it kind of read to me, the whole thing about the kids, it kind of read to me as like you grew up in a small town, you go off to college, which your parents are all happy about, but you come back and you think differently than the town, and the parents are like, surprise Pikachu face, like what do you mean you have your own opinions and ideas? And so the parents, to me, this is presenting as like the kids are being exposed to the world and other ways of life, and the parents can't handle that, and so they're like, they're stealing our children away. It's like, I think your kids maybe are becoming adults, with their own opinions, but I don't know. That's kind of how I read that.
In regard to the message that Keeley read for us, it seems it's going to be really important, which you guys said. But I also think it's a bit of a convoluted way that they end up receiving this message. If it's like
third hand.
A dying friend told someone that told we thought perhaps that we should tell you, random strangers in the woods, and here you go.
And then you wonder,
the word is spreading.
Yeah, and then you wonder, like, I mean, I think we all played that Whisper Down the Lane game in elementary school. So, like, what was the actual mess? Because let's be realistic. By the time that it gets, like, it's not just hearsay. It's like, well, then, and they said, and they said, and they said. By the time it gets to you, it's got everyone's own interpretation on it. So, probably for the context of the book and the story, we're supposed to take it as very literal. This is exactly what was shared. But also, like, if someone's dying in front of me, I might not be paying attention to what they're saying. I might be panicking about the fact that they're dying. So, I don't know.
Especially since Ryan's like, I barely understood half the words she was saying. And it's like, and yet we're relating this however many ears and mouths down the whispering row. Ironically, Keeley, what you were just pointing out about that aspect where towns and city folk might think of the Tuatha'an as a cult that is stealing their adult children away, even though these kids are grown up and finding their own path. We ironically get the inversion of that with the Tuatha'an too, briefly, where Perrin asks what happens when someone can't follow the way, a tinker, I mean, and Ryan and Ela exchanged a worried look, and Ryan said, they leave us, the lost go to live in the villages. And I get the sense there of, oh, yep, there it is. There's the shunning of the insular religious community who refuses to accept that their youths are going off and being corrupted by the world, like they're leaving on their permanent rumspringa, to bring it back to Pennsylvania related associations. Ela stared in the direction her grandson had gone. The lost cannot be happy, she sighed. And just this, it almost, I don't know, we don't know that they're shunning them per se, but that's certainly, I feel like that's probably the case, where they start to treat them as unpeople if they give up the way of the leaf and embrace the ways of the world.
But I also kind of wonder what that means, because I took it way farther than it needed to be. Which means that they've discovered their lust for blood, and therefore they have to leave because they've discovered that they love killing, and that's why people leave.
Oh.
Which I'm sure that's not at all what they're saying. They're probably just saying that, like, they discovered that they like watching wrestling matches, and that goes against our thing. Not that they have, this insatiable lust for blood, and so that's why they leave. But that's much more entertaining for me to think that that's what's happening here.
Just thinking, we're all the lost.
Yeah.
So yeah, we learned a little more. Ironically, we're like learning as much about the Aiel, I feel like, in this passage as we are about the Tuatha'an. So that's interesting because they spend so much time relating stories of where they've traveled, and I guess that was among the more recent ones. We learned that among Aiel, men do not sing. Isn't that strange? With some exceptions for like funeral dirges. We get a few more details there. We learn about the waste and how dangerous it is and how unlikely it is that any Trollocs ever went into there, which is why they have a hard time believing that's how this woman died. Elias is like 100 miles into the waste. Impossible. Jeva Kashar, that's what the Trollocs call the waste, the dying ground. They wouldn't go 100 miles in the waste if all the Murdral and the Blat were driving them. And again, another place that Trollocs won't go unless they do, it seems, if something sufficiently motivates them to. We get, we haven't even talked about like Egwene is, well, she's just kind of like listening to Aram being a little flirtatious, one of the younger tinkers, maybe around her age or Perrin's age. And of course, Perrin is he's being very Perrin, and he's being very like obnoxious about it. And he doesn't explicitly say this in his mind, and I'm trying to figure out like why he's being such an ass about Egwene, maybe even just being in conversation with this dude and then later going off to dance with him, is that I wonder if he feels affronted on behalf of Rand, because Rand and Egwene are kind of betrothed to each other unofficially, and they're kind of supposed to marry off. But I don't know. He doesn't really vocalize that or verbalize it in his thoughts. And we start to get what is becoming a running gag here of each of the three Two River teen boys. Perrin here is like, Rand would know what to do, he thought. Rand had an easy way with girls. And we've already seen, I believe, Rand thinking the same thing about Perrin would know what to do. He would know how to handle this. He always seems like confident and smooth with women, and I can hopefully it's not too much of a spoiler to say we will get exactly the same thing from Matt's perspective. Keeley rolling her eyes and shaking her head over here at our Two Rivers teen dynamic. Egwene is like sort of a little miffed that Perrin is giving her such a hard time about it, and she's like, Aram is a gentle boy. He's fun to be with. He makes me laugh, and he apologizes. I'm glad you had fun dancing, and she breaks down crying, thinking about the others, hoping they're alive. And then he falls asleep and the wolves are waiting for him. Any other thoughts on chapter 25 here?
So I wonder about the wolves. Are they actually like some kind of separate, like somewhat powerful being or like thing that they're able to keep the Dark One away from Matt, and like that keep Elias grounded? So, they were afraid that he would access the power, but he's got the wolves, so he doesn't. Or is it more simple than that, and it's just a very protective thing? Like, if you're out in the woods and you're surrounded by wolves, and you're not friends with them, you're gonna fucking die. So I think it's, I feel like it could also be that this is the first time since the Two Rivers attack that Perrin feels safe, and he's not just overwhelmed with fear, and so maybe it's like the Dark One feeds on fear, or that the wolves are kind of like this other, group, race, whatever, that is fighting against the Dark One. I don't know. I don't know how fleshed out the wolves are going to be, but I just thought, like, if I was, you see those videos of the wolf sanctuaries, and people can, like, nap with the wolf, and I was like, I think I would be the most comforted, protected person on Earth if I was chilling with a wolf that I knew wasn't going to kill me.
Oh, yeah, the safety of the pack.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's you said one or the other, and maybe that's a non-disjunctive or, right? Like maybe could be some of both. I don't really know at this point. Once again, it's like we're just starting to suss out the parameters of this and what's going on. Though it does kind of feel like it's happening pretty quickly. Maybe that's because we weren't in Perrin's perspective by now, but I don't think I am. I don't know that I had any hint of what was going on with him specifically, of the Two Rivers teens each experiencing their thing until this set of chapters. I don't know that I saw all that much foreshadowing necessarily, unless I missed it. I guess there was the axe and the way that he was behaving with the axe, but that was about, there's nothing like that clued me in advance. I think that it was interesting. Wolf Brothers. That's a turn for the story to take.
I think it's interesting that they had to split up a little bit, and then we learned a bit more about each of them in their new settings, and then when they come back together, I think that will be maybe an interesting or a slightly new dynamic. They all have these kind of different aspects going on now. A lot has changed for all the characters since they took off on their journey. And when they come back into their little Two Rivers pack, which I hope they will, it will be cool to see them these slightly new versions of themselves back together.
So I guess we'll find out next time then, when we are reading chapters 26 to 30, if you're reading along, in which our protagonist paths, I think, will continue to diverge out into the wider world for maybe a little longer, at least for a couple of chapters coming up, maybe before we get that rejoining of their paths again. So we'll find out next time and hope you join us. This episode of WOTCast was produced by yours truly. You can find me at twitter.com/Caleb Wimble. Katie, where can people find you?
You can find me at katiejarvis.com or on Instagram at 30inLA.
Keeley, where can people find you?
On Twitter or Instagram at Keeley_.
Remember, you can find us all at WOTCast.net. You can find Dan's information there as well. He is on Twitter at PansyDan, spelled with a Z. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at WOTCast Podcast. Support the show at patreon.com/WOTCast. You are supporting even by listening, and that support means a lot. If you support us for $2 a month at the Two Rivers tier, that helps us keep doing this. And if you join us at the $5 Tarvalon tier, you'll get access to special bonus-odes once those are recorded. You can also support us by leaving WOTCast a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or your podcast platform of choice. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps a lot. It's the number 2 way we can find new listeners. The number 1 way is to tell a friend about the show. Word of mouth means the world to us. That's all for today. Thanks so much for listening, folks. And remember, this is not the ending. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it is an ending. Farewell.
Like, I'm still gonna complain about it. It fucking sucks and it's expensive. But
it's worse when you're an adult too. Like it hurts more, right? Because
it's like they apologize to me all the time. It's like they've apologized already for what I'm going to experience. And then while she's like fucking around with my mouth, she's like, I'm sorry. And like at different points, she was like, okay, you haven't taken a breath in a while. I need you to breathe. Like, sorry, it fucking hurts.
Oh.